When Jonathan Meyers, Ridgewood's first black mayor, was humiliated, handcuffed, and accused of stealing his own car, the officers had no idea their actions were live-streamed to thousands. This moment ignited outrage, reshaping the city and forcing Jonathan to confront a system that saw his skin color as a threat. What he did next shocked everyone. But let's start at the beginning. On a quiet evening along Maple Avenue, lined with red brick buildings and well-maintained sidewalks under the soft glow of streetlights, Jonathan Meyers, the 38-year-old newly elected mayor of Ridgewood, drove home in his sleek, brand-new luxury sedan. Tall and broad-shouldered, with smooth brown skin and neatly trimmed hair, Jonathan wore a sharp navy suit, the collar of his white shirt crisp and his tie perfectly knotted. The car, an elegant black with polished chrome accents, was more than just a congratulatory gift from a local coalition, celebrating his historic win. It was a testament to his perseverance and the challenges he had overcome. As he cruised down the road, the faint hum of the car's engine accompanied his thoughts. His mind wandered back to the day's meetings on affordable housing initiatives, a cause close to his heart. The responsibility of being Ridgewood's first black mayor weighed heavily on him, but it also fueled his resolve to create meaningful change. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights illuminated his rearview mirror. His pulse quickened for a moment, but he reminded himself to stay calm. It was likely a routine stop. Pulling over to the side of the road, he exhaled slowly, his expression neutral but alert. Two white police officers approached the car, their body language stiff and their expressions sharp with scrutiny. The taller of the two, with a square jaw and a buzz cut, leaned toward the driver's side window, his lips curling into a smirk. "Nice car," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Seems a bit out of your league. Can I see your license and registration?" Jonathan's steady brown eyes met the officer's gaze as he reached for his wallet, his movements deliberate and calm. "Of course, officer," he replied, his voice composed as he handed over his documents. "Is there a problem?" The second officer, shorter with a wiry frame and a badge gleaming under the streetlight, snatched the papers, scanning them with a skeptical glare. "We'll see about that," he muttered, glancing between the documents and Jonathan. His tone carried an unmistakable air of suspicion. Despite everything being in order, the officers exchanged a glance, their smirks widening as if they had already made up their minds. "This car doesn't look like it belongs to you," the taller officer finally said, his voice challenging. "We're gonna need you to step out, sir." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth tightening as he remained seated. "I think there's a misunderstanding," he said evenly. "I'm Jonathan Meyers, the mayor of Ridgewood." For a brief second, there was silence. Then the officers laughed, their expressions tinged with mockery. "Mayor? Right," the shorter one scoffed, nodding toward the car door. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he masked his frustration, pushing the door open and stepping out into the cool night air. His presence, dignified and commanding, did nothing to soften the officer's demeanor. Jonathan stepped out of the sleek black sedan, his shoulders squared and his face calm, though a flicker of frustration glimmered in his sharp brown eyes. The cool night air was filled with murmurs as a small crowd began to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by the flashing lights and the escalating tension. Phones were raised, their cameras capturing every detail of the unfolding scene. "That's Mayor Meyers," a young man whispered, his voice carrying just loud enough for those nearby to hear. A few heads turned in recognition, but the officers remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully indifferent. Standing with his hands flat on the cool metal hood of his car, Jonathan maintained his composure as the taller officer barked, "What kind of mayor drives a car like this? Looks more like a dealer's ride to me." The venom in his tone caused an audible gasp to ripple through the onlookers. Jonathan's fists clenched momentarily before he forced himself to relax. His temper threatened to rise, but he knew better than to let it show. "Officer," he said evenly, his voice low and firm, "everything you're doing right now is being recorded." He glanced toward the growing sea of phones, their lenses unblinking as they captured the scene. The taller officer sneered, leaning in just enough for his voice to carry over the murmurs. "You think we care? Keep your mouth shut." his words cut like a knife, eliciting cries of protest from the crowd. Jonathan's calm demeanor didn't falter, even as the shorter officer grabbed his wrists with unnecessary force and snapped on a pair of handcuffs. The cold metal bit into his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of humiliation that threatened to rise. Behind him, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their frustration bubbling into anger. "That's our mayor!" a woman shouted from the sidewalk, her voice sharp with indignation. "What the hell are you doing?" The officers ignored her, their radios crackling as they called for backup. The scene felt surreal as Jonathan was led toward the squad car, the flashing lights painting streaks of red and blue across his tailored navy suit. Unbeknownst to the officers, several bystanders had already begun live streaming the incident, their feeds spreading across social media like wildfire. The hashtag Justice for Meyers had started trending within minutes, igniting a wave of outrage that would soon grow far beyond the quiet street where the injustice unfolded. By the time Jonathan was escorted into the police station, the situation outside had already spiraled out of the officer's control. Social media had erupted into a firestorm. The hashtags, #Justice for Mayor, Meyers and #, driving. While Black dominated trending topics, accompanied by countless videos of the incident, local news stations broke into their regular programming, airing clips of Jonathan being handcuffed as outraged residents called City Hall non-stop, demanding answers. Inside the station, the two officers remained steadfast in their misplaced confidence, treating Jonathan with the same dismissive coldness as before. They led him into a holding area, ignoring his quiet dignity and the glances of other officers who seemed uneasy as whispers spread about who they had in custody. The tension shattered when the precinct captain stormed into the room, his pale complexion betraying his panic. His usually polished appearance was disheveled, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He fixed the two officers with a furious glare. "Let him go!" the captain snapped, his voice a low hiss that carried an edge of fear. The officers exchanged confused glances, one of them attempting to stammer out an explanation. "Sir, we were just—" "Do you know who this is?" the captain barked, cutting him off mid-sentence. He pointed a trembling finger at Jonathan, his tone incredulous. "You just arrested the mayor. The mayor!" The words hit the two officers like a slap. Their smug expressions crumbled, replaced by shock and mounting panic. "The mayor?" one of them repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan stood motionless, his piercing gaze fixed on them as they scrambled to uncuff him, their hands trembling. The room was silent except for the clink of the handcuffs being removed. Once free, Jonathan adjusted his suit and turned to face the officers. His expression was calm, but his voice carried a sharp edge. "An apology isn't enough," he said, each word deliberate and powerful. "You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected the office I represent and the people who put their trust in me. This is bigger than you, and there will be consequences." The captain, visibly distressed, tried to stammer out an apology, but Jonathan had already turned on his heel and walked out of the station, his steps measured and resolute. He wasn't just a victim of prejudice tonight. He was a leader with a renewed purpose to demand accountability and change. The incident exploded across national headlines within hours, igniting outrage that rippled far beyond Ridgewood. News outlets replayed the live-streamed footage of Jonathan Meyers, the city's first black mayor, being humiliated and wrongfully detained. Civil rights organizations and activists mobilized almost immediately, condemning the racial profiling and calling for sweeping police reforms. The hashtags now were Justice for Mayor, Meyers, and #driving. While Black became rallying cries, uniting people across the country in their demand for change. The backlash was swift. The two officers were placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. Public pressure mounted on the Ridgewood Police Department as the community demanded answers and accountability. Protesters filled the streets, their chants echoing through City Hall. The next morning, Jonathan stood before a sea of cameras at a press conference. His presence was commanding yet composed, his tailored navy suit reflecting his professional demeanor. He gazed at the crowd of reporters and supporters, his voice steady but impassioned as he began. "This isn't just about me," Jonathan declared, his words carrying the weight of his experience. This is about every black man and woman who's been judged not by their character, but by the color of their skin. This is about dismantling the prejudice ingrained in our systems for far too long. It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of who they are, has to endure what I went through last night. The audience erupted into applause, their support palpable. Jonathan's words resonated deeply, galvanizing the city council to fast-track a proposal for a civilian oversight committee, a policy he had long advocated. The committee would serve as a watchdog, ensuring accountability and transparency in police practices. Jonathan's resilience inspired a wave of action. Community members, fueled by his strength and determination, rallied to support the reforms. His ability to turn personal injustice into a movement for systemic change earned him admiration, not just in Ridgewood, but across the nation. By the end of the year, Ridgewood transformed into a model city for police accountability and racial justice. The reforms implemented under Jonathan's leadership set a precedent for other cities grappling with similar issues. At a unity rally months later, where the air was filled with hopeful energy and the diverse crowd stood shoulder to shoulder, Jonathan addressed the gathered citizens. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "This is just the beginning." The crowd roared in agreement, a symbol of the collective power to effect lasting change. Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that his struggle had sparked a movement far greater than himself.